1947. A ruined German city in the American zone. Between the shells of bombed-out apartment blocks and the makeshift stalls of the black market, a young woman in a mended dress walked arms in arm with an American soldier. To passing German neighbors, the sight was an accusation. To him, in his crisp uniform and well-fed body, it felt like proof that something decent could grow out of rubble. To her, it was all of those things, and none of them. In a cheap notebook bought with cigarettes, she wrote that night, "To them I am a traitor. To him I am redemption. To myself I am not sure." Her name, in the surviving fragments of her story, appears as Lieselotte K. Lies for short. She was 23, a former secretary in a munitions factory, now living with her widowed mother in a half-collapsed tenement. The man whose arm she held was Private First Class James Miller, 25, from Ohio, now part of the occupation forces. Their lives had been shaped by the same war from opposite ends of a gun barrel. Now they met daily in a place neither had expected to exist, a zone between conqueror and conquered, blurred by hunger, loneliness, and the desperate need for a future, the ruins that made survival a full-time job. May 1945 had officially brought peace to Germany. For Lise, peace smelled of rotting plaster, coal smoke from makeshift stoves, latrines dug where gardens had once been. Her father had died in 1943 in an air raid on Hamburg, her older brother somewhere on the Eastern Front. The family photo album contained wedding pictures, children in sailor suits, a boy in Wehrmacht grey. No bodies, just notifications. By the winter of 1946-47, the hunger winter, Western Allied zones still struggled with food shortages, fuel scarcity, overcrowded housing. Official rations in many cities dropped to 1,500 calories per day on paper. In practice, black markets decided who ate and who went hungry. Lise queued for hours at ration offices, then again at food distribution points. She bartered her last good shoes for potatoes, bedsheets for coal. She watched American trucks roll by carrying canned meat, chocolate, cigarettes as plentiful as autumn leaves. At night, she wrote, we were told the Americans were soft, decadent, weak. Their boots sound very hard on our streets. Her bitterness was complicated by something else. Without those same boots, without the warehouses of food they guarded, many in her city would simply starve. Defeat had turned the enemy into both occupier and lifeline. Fraternization bans on paper, black market of emotions in reality. In 1945, the US military imposed strict fraternization bans. American soldiers were forbidden to date German women, visit German homes, socialize beyond official duties. The reasons were ideological and practical: avoid going soft on former enemies, prevent venereal disease, maintain distance from a population still suspected of latent Nazism. In posters and briefs, brainwashed, untrustworthy. But hunger, loneliness, and proximity have little respect for regulations written in English. By late 1945, soldiers winked at German girls in the street, traded coffee for laundry services, slipped chocolates to children. German women, facing starvation wages and shattered families, entered a spectrum of relationships that Allied reports tried and failed to categorize neatly. Inca, from Amiga, from Americans for Americans. Some transactional, food, soap, nylon stockings in exchange for sex. Some ambiguous mixtures of affection and survival. A smaller number became genuine partnerships that lasted decades. The American military police might confiscate a German woman's bicycle for illegal barter. They could not confiscate the longing for warmth in a freezing, destroyed world. First contact, coffee, not ideology. Lise met James not at a Nazi rally or denazification hearing, but at a displaced persons camp canteen, where she worked as a German typist. The camp housed former forced laborers from Poland, Ukraine, Italy, survivors of concentration camps, civilians fleeing the Soviets. Her job: type up lists of names, file reports, help process food distribution under American supervision. To keep Germans at arm's length, the U.S. Army preferred to hire them in subordinate, carefully supervised roles. One afternoon, her typewriter ribbon snapped. She cursed under her breath. An American voice behind her said, in clumsy German, "Entschuldigung, miss, need help?" She turned to see James, tall, freckles, uniform pressed, a mug of coffee in his hand. He grinned, offered the mug. "Für Sie." The smell was intoxicating. Real coffee, not acorn substitute. She hesitated, aware of watching eyes. DPs suspicious of any German, German staff suspicious of any American too friendly. Then she took it. Danke. She tried out her school English. "You are from where?" "Ohio," he said. "Is that near New York?" He laughed. "Not really, but close enough." In that moment, the global architecture of occupation shrank to a broken ribbon, a mug of coffee, two young people hesitantly practicing the other's language. They did not talk about Hitler, Roosevelt, or Yalta. They talked about weather, siblings, the absurdity of foreign place names. The war had taught them that the other side was monstrous. The canteen taught them the more confusing possibility that the other side might also be human. Gossip, slurs, and the price of walking with the enemy. As their conversations lengthened, Lisa's co-workers noticed. So did her neighbors. In German streets, a new vocabulary of contempt emerged for women seen with Allied soldiers. American Liebchen, American lover, American lover, Schlampen, Schlutz, Schlampen, Schalaboratorinnen, Schaluk, collaborators. People spat in the dust after she passed. Older women muttered, "She sells herself for chocolate." They did not know that James often insisted on paying her a proper wage for mending his shirts, that he gave extra rations to her mother, that often they simply walked and talked. For many Germans, especially women who had endured years of bombing and sacrifice, watching one of their own arm in arm with a man wearing the uniform that had dropped those bombs was unbearable. It inverted the wartime story of loyalty. Yesterday, being seen with an English flyer would have meant denunciation. Today, being seen with an American GI meant whispers and ostracism. Lizzie's mother, frail and exhausted, watched this with a mix of fear and pragmatism. "You must be careful," she told her daughter. "They can send him away. They can ruin us. But also, we need the things he brings." Love, if that is what it was, germinated in soil full of calculation. Lise knew that without James, her ration card would stretch less far. James knew that without Lise, his tour in Germany would be one long exercise in boredom and resentment. Their critics insisted this made their bond impure. Reality made the line between survival and affection harder to draw. American regulations versus American hearts. By 1946, the blunt fraternization ban had begun to crumble under its own hypocrisy. Reports from the field made clear large numbers of GIs were already in relationships with German women. Illegitimate children, nicknamed Besatzungskinder, occupation children, were being born. Venereal disease rates were high despite bans. US commanders realized that pretending such relationships did not exist did nothing to manage them. They gradually relaxed rules, allowing off-duty socializing, visits to German homes under certain conditions, eventually proposals for marriage, but only after strict screening. Screening meant background checks on the German woman's political past, health examinations, character references, For Liss, James's first mention of marriage came not as a romantic proposal under a full moon, but in a cramped barracks day room. He unfolded a letter from home. His sister had written, "Mom says, don't you dare bring a Nazi home." He smiled ruefully. "If I want you to come to America, we have to prove you're not one of the bad ones." She bristled. "I never joined the party," she said. "I typed orders, I was bombed, I queued for food. Is that bad?" He hesitated. "I know. But papers don't know. Their love, whatever its depth, would know. Their love, whatever its depth, would now pass through filters of denazification committees. Immigration officials in a country that had spent years seeing Germans as the enemy. It was war by other means, forms instead of bullets, interviews instead of interrogations. The neighbor's court of opinion. When word spread in Lisa's neighborhood that she intended to marry an American, the reaction was swift and vicious. In stairwells and at water pumps, women hissed, "You will leave your people for him, betrayer." Men, often those who had spent the war safely in rear positions or had been too young to serve, muttered about honor. One shouted after her in the street, "Why don't you take your army and leave today?" "We don't want you here," she wanted to shout back. "And where were you when we needed coal? When my brother froze in Russia? When my father died under your glorious war?" But she did not. She walked, jaw clenched, James at her side, pretending not to understand the words, though he understood the hatred. At the same time, others watched her with something closer to envy than disgust. "Imagine," a neighbor whispered to her friend, "to have enough to eat, to have stockings again, to get away from all this." Lise was not just a traitor to some. She was also, unwittingly, a symbol of escape to others. Her body became a projection surface for an entire country's unresolved feelings, shame at defeat, resentment toward occupiers, desire to forget everything and start again elsewhere. She wrote, "It is easier for them to hate me than to ask why we lost, why we followed, why we let it happen." The human need for a scapegoat rarely misses such an opportunity. Screening a bride, denazification as gatekeeper to America. To marry James and emigrate, Liz had to pass 2 tests: West German denazification courts, U.S. Army and immigration vetting, her denazification file lists, employment in wartime industry, no party membership, no known involvement in Nazi organizations beyond nominal contributions. She was classified as entlasdet, exonerated, or at most, a Mitläuferin Chandran, follower. Many in her generation received the same. It allowed the new federal republic to function with a population that had, in various ways, lived under and often cooperated with the Nazi system. American officials, conscious of the Holocaust and wary of importing Nazis, scrutinized war brides carefully. They asked, "Did you ever participate in activities against Jews? Did you work for the Gestapo, SS, or NSDAP?" She answered no. It was true. It was also incomplete. She, like most Germans, had lived in a society where Jews disappeared from offices, shops, and apartment buildings. She had watched their arrests in 1938 from behind curtains. She had heard neighbors say, "They have been sent to the East to work." She had not asked too many questions. Silence was safer. The forms had no box for, "I knew enough to suspect something terrible, and I chose not to press." Without such a box, the bureaucracy could declare itself satisfied. Tick. Approved. The moral questions remained unticked. America as promise and punishment. For James, bringing a German wife home meant confronting his own country's prejudices. In small-town America, memories of Pearl Harbor, fallen soldiers, Nazi atrocities were still raw. "Why couldn't you find a nice American girl?" his mother asked. He answered, "The war's over. She's not Hitler. She's not Hitler. She's just a girl whose home we bombed." In that sentence lay the twisted symmetry of their bond. He had been part of an invading force that helped destroy her country. She, by marrying him, would become a living, breathing proof that America's victory could be turned into reconciliation. For some Americans, German war brides represented proof of magnanimity, the superiority of democratic ideals. For others, they were sleeping enemies, vessels of a tainted bloodline. In West Germany, her departure would be read as abandonment, escape. In the United States, her arrival would be read as integration, risk. She stood between these interpretations like someone crossing a bridge that both sides had reasons to doubt. The last walk through ruins. On the day of her departure in 1948, Lise walked one last time through her city's devastated center. The rubble still lay in many districts, though Trümmerfrauen rubble women had cleared streets and stacked bricks. Shops had reopened with improvised signs. US-sponsored CA care packages had begun to arrive. The new Estdeutsche Mark had replaced worthless Reichsmarks, and with it, markets buzzed with renewed trade. Her mother hugged her at the station, pressing into her hand a small cross and a faded photograph of her father. "Do not forget where you come from," she whispered, "and do not let them tell you you are less because you are German. But do not forget what was done in our name either." On the platform, neighbors watched. Some turned away. Some offered curt nods. An old woman, who had once chastised her for walking with the enemy, stepped forward unexpectedly and pressed a bundle into her hand, a bit of sausage, for the journey. "Don't say I never did anything for you." It was not forgiveness. It was something more ordinary and perhaps more human, a grudging admission that survival had taken many forms. She boarded the train that would take her to Bremerhaven, then a troopship across the Atlantic. Outside the window, the ruins receded. Inside, she opened her notebook and wrote, "I am leaving a country that used me and then hated me. I am going to a country that hated me and now wants to use me to prove it is kind. Somewhere between those two lies the truth of who I am." War brides as living treaties. Lise was one of tens of thousands of German women who married Allied soldiers, estimated around 20,000, 50,000 for Americans alone. Each marriage functioned unofficially as a small treaty of peace, a symbol that enemies could become family. But these treaties came with fine print, written not in legal language, but in daily compromises. In America, German war brides often faced suspicion, were asked to erase their accents, felt pressure to downplay their past. In West Germany, those who stayed lived as constant reminders that the boundary between resistance and collaboration, between victim and survivor, between love and opportunism, was rarely clear. For Lise, civil life after the war was not a simple redemption story, a fairy tale romance where love conquers all. A fairy tale romance where love conquers all. It was a messy, negotiated existence where hunger pushed her toward the arm of a man in a foreign uniform. Affection grew among rubble, colored by gratitude and guilt. Bureaucrats judged whether her heart aligned with new political realities. The mathematics of her life could be written like this: one husband from the former enemy. Two countries claiming her as proof of their moral superiority. Dozens of neighbors judging. Hundreds of forms filled. None of those numbers fully captured the uncertainty she articulated in that first diary entry. To them, I am a traitor. To him, I am redemption. To myself, I am not sure. The war created calculation tables of casualties, tonnage, destroyed cities. The peace created a different ledger, Who forgave whom? Who married whom? Who left? Who stayed? In that ledger, women like Lee's were both entries and accountants. Civil life in post-Tudor Germany, through her eyes, was not just about rebuilding houses and currencies. It was about asking whether a person could build a new identity on the ruins of an old one without burying what lay underneath. The answer, like her marriage, remained complicated, unfinished, much like the history of the country she left behind.